What do you
Okay.
think? Should we get
I think we
started?
should get going. Yeah, I was going to say we should get going.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, good morning, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. Hello. I'm Rebecca Ing. I'm from CEA Consulting, and I'm joined today by Emily Knight and my colleague Anna Rick. And we are going to be your webinar hosts today. Before we begin, I wanted to share just a couple of things. Actually, Emily's going to share some instructions for Wordly, and then I'll just talk through the flow of the webinar.
Okay, so today we'll have a couple of speakers speaking in Japanese, and we'll have other speakers speaking in English. So we wanted to provide translation services for you. Now, bear with us. Blue Convergence Fund, the organization I work for, we are brand new, and this is the first time we are using this, but hopefully it works really well. So I'm going to first of all, I'm going to drop a link in the chat. There's multiple ways to access Wordly. First of all, if you want to have it in your browser, click the link in the chat and then just select the language that you want to translate it in, and it'll run down your screen. The other thing you can do is you can scan this QR code on your phone and again select the language, and it will run down your screen. And then the last thing I will do is if you are joining this from the Zoom Workplace app or the Zoom app versus the Zoom browser, I will share the Wordly app with you, and you can actually have it running in your Zoom. So I'm going to pause for a minute and do that now.
All right.
I'm still doing it.
Okay.
It takes a second because you got to copy paste a little code in. There we go.
All right. Well, we are going to hear from a number of folks, and I think Emily will give an introduction to them. This, of course, the presentations from our speakers are going to be followed by a Q&A segment at the end. We really want to encourage discussion at the end of the presentations, and so please submit your questions for the presenters in the Q&A tab located at the bottom of your screen. You should be able to click on that and enter in your question. Anna and I will be monitoring this throughout the meeting and will help direct the questions to the speaker. We'll be using the Zoom chat for sharing resources, links, and comments. And so we'll be monitoring that as well. But if you do have questions, please use the Q&A function. And do note that we are recording this webinar. All right, Emily.
Cool. Thank you all so much for joining us today. This is a really important portfolio of projects that have been ongoing for the last couple of years. The projects that you're going to hear from were funded by the Lenfest Ocean Program, which sunsetted at the end of June 2025. And one of the final portfolios that we funded in 2023 for a series of two and a half, etc. year projects was managing protected areas in a changing ocean. And because we knew that the projects were going to end at the time that the program was ending, we really wanted to ensure that the results and the insights from these projects got out as broadly as possible. Because I think you're going to see from the presentations today that we have learned an amazing amount from these projects. In particular, the fact that there is much that you can do to adapt existing protected areas to a changing ocean. I want to acknowledge some of my colleagues. I used to work for the Lenfest Ocean Program, and some of my colleagues who also used to work for the Lenfest Ocean Program are here tonight, namely Charlotte Hudson and Sarah Close, who scoped this portfolio when we were at Lenfest, and now we are with the Blue Convergence Fund, which is a new organization that started just this past year to, in some ways, continue the work of the Lenfest Ocean program, but also experiment with grant making and outreach and engagement in very new ways. So we're getting to build on that legacy. And for this portfolio in particular, um, we really learned so much that really needs to be shared to encourage people to continue supporting this kind of work. Because when we scoped this portfolio, at the time, in many ways, people were like, what can we do with existing, MPAs? Do we have to move them all or all these kinds of things that made realistic concerns, understandable concerns that would say, did the initial investment not make sense? And it turns out this portfolio really proved that that's not necessarily true. And so I'm really grateful for all the grantees that are here, the researchers, the experts that are here to share their insights today, and really encourage you to learn about us too at Blue Convergence Fund. And I'll drop some links in the chat when I get done talking. So that you can continue to follow the work that we're doing right now in climate resilient fisheries and ocean biodiversity. So, with that, I will turn over to introducing the researchers that are here to present to you. You can see from even the previous slide, they're from all over the world. The projects in this portfolio were from all over the world. And first, we're going to have talking Nur Awafal Dama from a postdoctoral fellow with the University of California, Los Angeles, and Stanford University. Fiorenza McKelly, who can't be here tonight, was also a NERS collaborator on this project. We'll have Remy Odenyo, a PhD candidate at Macquarie University, to speak to their project in Kenya. We'll have Megumi Nakano, who is a marine program manager for the General Incorporated Association of Orishima Labo, speaking to the project in Japan, along with her colleague James Reimer, who's a professor at University of Ryukyu in Japan. And then lastly, we'll have a team from Indonesia, mainly Iqbal Nindo Turnip, who's an MEL officer with Fauna and Flora International. And he'll be representing their project, but also a key collaborator has been Dedi Kiswayati, who's a program manager with Fauna and Flora. He was unable to be here tonight. Hopefully, is safe and okay because of a power outage. Um, but Iqbal is perfectly capable and knows the project backwards and forwards. So we're so excited to have them here. So I guess, Nur, I will first turn it over to you.
Thank you, Emily, and thanks everyone for being here. It's my pleasure. So I'm Noor Alfed Almau, postdoc, and at Stanford, leading this project also with Theo, who couldn't be here, as Emily mentioned. And just to give you a bit of background of the project, our project started because a few years ago, the local communities of Mexico approached us and asked us two fundamental questions. The first one is, how can we identify climate refugia for kelp forests and where are they? And the second, what can we do in these places? How should we manage them? And as a result, we assembled this research team of scientists from universities from California and Mexico, which is basically Stanford, UCLA, and UABC, but also Comunidad en Biodiversidad, who's a local NGO with a lot of experience in the region, and also the Federation of Fishing Cooperatives of Baja California. And why kelp forest? So kelp forests, giant kelp forests are the dominant species in Mexico, in Baja California. They provide some of the most important fisheries to the region, and most importantly, they're the only worm distribution limit in all of North America. It's located in Baja California. These areas are managed by large federal marine protected areas that cover more than 50% or around 50% of these areas, but also by by local fishing concessions that have territorial user rights for this region. And why kelp forests? Well, kelp forest is one of the most biodiverse ecosystem in the world, apart from being beautiful. It sustains thousands of species of fish, invertebrate, and marine mammals. And as a result, it also provides important ecosystem services to local communities, like sustaining some of the most productive fisheries in the world. But there's an issue with kelp forests. There's some of the most threatened ecosystems in the world, all around the world are being threatened. And some of the work that we've been doing through the Lenfest Ocean Program has found that Mexico has lost more than 50% of its kelp forest due to heat waves. This is an ecological catastrophe, no? Imagine losing 50% of the entire forest of this region. But not all places have reacted in the same way. Some places have collapsed, specifically in the north, where we have a more fragmented fisheries and where a lot of the human population is located, while other places, actually in the in the worm limit, are thriving and doing very well due to less human impact, but also because of the management inside the MPAs by local fisheries. And as a result, we need to we need to establish or use climate adaptation strategies. And there's many of them, but two of the main important ones are identifying and managing climate refugia, which are these areas that despite of everything that is happening, biodiversity is persisting, so they're less impacted and they can support the recovery of other areas. And to do so, we need to find ways of mapping these places at large scales. And what we used is remote sensing. We have more than 4 decades of remote sensing in the area that allow us to map the persistence of this forest across the entire region of Baja California. The other thing that we can do is protecting food webs through MPAs and other management strategies. And through the Lenfest Ocean Program, we found evidence that marine protected areas actually can provide resilience to the impacts of heat waves by supporting more intact food webs that minimize the probability that these ecosystems shift to things like sea urchin barrens by recovering these predators. And we found similar evidence in the well-managed areas in Baja California. So with all of this in mind and going back to our questions, how can we identify climate refugia and where they are, and how should we be managing these places? We've done a few things through this project. First, we conducted extensive field expeditions to understand how these kelp forests were responding, the communities. And second, we used remote sensing to map these refugia, these persistent forests across the region. Then we used this information through a series of workshops and meetings with more than 50 participants of the local communities, agencies, and NGOs to provide the insights from all of this knowledge, see if these maps made sense, these refugia maps, and also define what a climate refugia is for the region. So throughout all of these workshops, we validated these maps, improved them, provided all of these insights, and then used them to co-produce a guide, a climate adaptation guide for refugia in Mexico. Now, the main findings of the project are that actually persistent forests are found throughout the region, even in the areas that were historically persistent in the north, where today have collapsed due to urchins and human impacts. But there's still a lot of persistent forests even in those regions. And in the south, as I was mentioning, near the distribution limit of the species, we have thriving ecosystems. So this is an example of a map that we used through the workshops, and we produced around 40 maps tailored to each region as the local communities thought it was best. Also, we validated that these maps made sense and that the local communities actually found that these places match their knowledge. And then the other thing that we did in the next slide is based on all of this knowledge, the expeditions, the map, the local knowledge, and how things work in Mexico in terms of management, we co-develop these 18 management measures for managing climate refugia based on 5 typologies. Site selection, so we can use these maps and these ideas for site selection. Restoration, protection, MPAs, local community reserves, other measures. Monitoring and science, monitoring these places and understanding why these places are persisting and how they're responding to management. And finally, managing species that are important for the ecosystem. This is very important because we co-produce these guidelines, and they are meant to be not just for our region. They can be adjusted for other regions. For example, in this slide, you can see that to the left, it's in Spanish, but trust me on this. To the left, you have general guidelines for restoration, and that can be applied to any ecosystem, of course, refined. And then to the right, you have the specific considerations for Baja California and the kelp forest of Baja California. This guide and other material is being disseminated. The guide will be available soon and translated to English. So please let us know if you want to see it, and we'll share it. Also, we've disseminated, you've seen beautiful photos of kelp forest. We've disseminated it by taking underwater photographies, professional ones, the guide, infographics like this one about kelp forests in Mexico, where they're distributed, why they're important, the threats, and the value of these areas. And in the next slide, you can see that we have used this case as a pilot. And now we have a new project that follow-ups the Lenfest Ocean Program, funded by an accelerator from the School of Sustainability from Stanford, which hopes to expand this project to other countries focused in Latin America and California. Latin America meaning Mexico, Chile, Peru, and Argentina. So we assembled a new team building from the previous one that incorporates NGOs and academics from these regions. And as we are mapping this persistent forest throughout these regions, we are also working to see how these maps can be used for other management strategies based on the context of the other regions. So this is very exciting, and we hope that this can then be scaled to other ecosystems and other regions. The other thing that we have done, and this is very dear to me because it's kind of my personal project, is leverage this knowledge and connections to establish MassKelp, a foundation that I direct that has the objective of protecting kelp forests globally, specifically focusing on Latin America, and leveraging all of this knowledge and connections to operationalize the management of climate refugia for this forest. So please, so hopefully will be sharing more from that. And finally, to finalize the presentation, this project has really been transformative, not just for the region, but also for myself. Doing participatory science has been a new approach for me. I mean, I've been working with it for a while, but this was leading a project on this was great. And also just thanking the Lenfest Ocean Program, and most important, the local communities of Baja California that have provided logistic support and have actively been part of the project. For example, being community divers in many of these expeditions. So it has been a great experience, and it has leveraged a lot of information, science, and connections for the region. And thanks everyone for your time and for the institutions that have supported this effort. Thank you. And I'll pass it next to Remy.
Thank you, Noor. So my name is Rami Odenyo, and I'll be taking you through a project that we implemented in Kenya, where we sought to identify optimal locations of small-scale fisheries closures. And this was a collaborative research partnership between the Wildlife Conservation Society and Macquarie University, funded by the Lenfest Ocean Program and NORAD. So we had a team that conceptualized this project. And it was a very insightful and collaborative process. So we had Dr. Nyawera, Dr. Jennifer, Professor Mina, myself. I'm currently undertaking a PhD at Macquarie University, but initially worked at the Wildlife Conservation Society as the interim program manager and coordinator of the project. We also had Dr. Kyle Zawada, who was part of this team. So why are we doing this? Why did we decide to focus on community closures? So in Kenya, we have a co-management framework where communities have a mandate to be able to manage a certain area, an expanse of the beach, but also in the waters, in the marine space. And one of the tools that has been of interest is implementing community closures. This has happened over 20 years, with the first one established around 2006. We've had varying levels of success, and this was majorly due to factors such as the ecological suitability. You might place a closure in a certain place, but what is the condition, ecologically speaking, in terms of the coral and the fish, seagrass and mangrove? A majority of the closures are focusing on coral reefs, but we have other critical habitats like seagrass and mangrove, which had been missed. And there's also this aspect of connectivity, which areas are more suitable considering where we might have sources and sinks. And another important factor is some of these closures that were established in areas where the communities are not really ready or willing in terms of their capacity or just the willingness to have some of these restrictions. And also, there's been historically a top-down approach where the idea comes maybe from different institutions or organizations, and you don't get the community's sort of contribution of voice integrated into these processes. So the project sought to address some of these challenges, and we used various approaches to be able to address this. One of them was using very advanced tools such as machine learning to be able to map the condition of these three critical habitats, which is coral reefs, seagrass, and mangrove, and also integrate connectivity, seascape connectivity between these habitats, and also integrating the local knowledge by eliciting what their priorities are, and including that in sort of the prioritization to be able to decide which areas are suitable for closures. We undertook governance surveys to evaluate capacity. We also undertook various field surveys where it was sort of experiential learning for communities to know what the status of the resource is. In the end, we had products that integrated all these interdisciplinary approaches, and it was a very informative and insightful outcome, or there are very useful outputs, which I'll speak about in the next slide. So, what what did we do in terms of machine learning? Well, we used the predictions to be able to prioritize certain habitats based on condition, and we basically statistically modeled the various broad system changes presently, but also into the future, considering the current changes, scenarios, climate change scenarios. And one thing about using these models is sometimes in most cases, they integrate sort of satellite information and products. You might have field observation, but you don't really have the local knowledge or their voices integrated into sort of informing which areas are priorities for an intervention such as community closures, which you'll see. Yes. So if you look at this slide, you'll see the outcome of elicitation of local knowledge. And what we did was we had a process, a participatory mapping process where we elicited the priorities, conservation priorities, the community's conservation priorities. We also had government agencies that are part of the process, And through this, they were able to outline which areas are important for which habitat. And other than just the habitat areas that are important, we were able to get insight on which areas are important for conservation in terms of um, the sorry about that. In terms of the condition of the area for fishing or for tourism and so forth. So sorry about that. In terms of eliciting local knowledge on habitats and important areas. I'm coming. Just give me a few minutes. I'm coming. Sorry about that. That was the step of the process. Next slide. So what does this mean? When you have these different kinds of information, you have information on the benefits, but also the costs. And I'm coming.
It's not working.
You have the various information on benefits and costs, and what that means, you can be able to evaluate the trade-offs. Apologies.
It will not
I'm coming, okay? Let me come. Sorry.
What?
Okay, so if you look at this kind of framework, you find based on based on this kind of information, if you have the fisheries patterns, you have the benefits in terms of ecological, but also in terms of the community benefits, you can be able to see which areas are more suitable, considering the various trade-offs. It's very powerful in that sense because some areas that were identified by communities were not picked up by the machine learning sort of tools. But there were challenges in terms of validating sort of the models, but also validating the community priorities and important areas. Next slide. So what does this all mean? We were able to, through this project funded by the Lenfest Ocean Project Program and NORAD, we were able to develop an integrated framework that looks at different disciplines. We were able to produce various products that can be used in making decisions, but we also integrated community voices. There's currently a National Marine Spatial Planning process that was initialized this year, where these findings have been shared with the committee, but also at a localized scale, we've integrated this into joint co-management area plans, where there's a specific area. The previous slide showed an area where community was actually thinking of establishing a community closure and utilize these products, and the process is ongoing to establish this. Next slide. So this has been a very insightful process and project, and it wouldn't have been possible without the communities we engaged. We engaged over 90 communities spanning the whole coastline. Those are all counties in Kenya. We engaged various government authorities, national and also county government authorities, and our partners, Lenfest Ocean Program and NORAD, were with us every step of the way. It was a really good collaboration, and we did develop a product that is available in the form of a platform which you can be able to scan. You can get online. It's an online platform if you scan whatever is on the screen. Sorry about the background noise. I'd like to hand it over to James and Megumi. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Remy. Thanks very much for making it through your talk despite the super cute interruption. That was really cool. So anyway, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is James Reimer. Together with Megumi, who's going to present about half of the slides later on, I'm going to talk to you about our project that's going on in Japan right now. So without further ado, Our team consists basically of Maria Beggar at the University of Leeds, who specializes in modeling, Megumi, who you'll meet very soon, and myself, who works on marine organisms. And together, we've been working, as I can show you on the next slide, in Japan. And so in Japan, like many parts of the world, the ocean is warming. And as you can see in the smaller map on the upper left, certain parts of the world are warming more quickly than others in terms of marine ocean temperatures. And Japan, and particularly southern Japan, is one of these hotspots. And so at these areas where ocean warming is occurring more quickly than average, it's been predicted that tropicalization will happen. And so basically, tropicalization, which was first hypothesized 10, 15 years ago, is the idea that tropical and subtropical species will move poleward, north or south, as ocean temperatures rise. However, as the next slide shows, it's actually not quite that simple. It's not just that animals are moving north or south. There's actually a lot of different scenarios that could be possible. For example, this figure is showing you four different scenarios. The top one is basically having corals, for example, arriving from warmer areas into colder areas or formerly colder areas. But you could also get, for example, the second scenario, the second from the top is showing loss of local kelp, which Nur also had talked about. But instead of having corals arriving from the south, having the local corals expand in number. The third scenario could be you lose your kelp, but at the same time, the corals don't expand, and you end up with these sort of more herbivores, more urchins, and you get what we call in Japanese isoyake, or basically like it looks like burnt rock. There's not much on the rocks at all. And finally, at the bottom, you could have a scenario where you lose your local macroalgae, your kelp, but then you have tropical macroalgal species come in instead. So there's a lot of different scenarios, and we really need to understand what's going on for conservation and for basically planning for the future. So as the next slide shows, I'm going to basically show you what we've done in Japan. Basically, we had some data from 10 years ago that we had conducted. So thanks to the ocean program, Lenfest ocean program, we went back, we went to 50 different sites across Japan. And at these sites, we had a team of about 8 to 10 of us, and we did massive underwater surveys, corals, soft corals, sponges, algae, fish, mollusks, holothurians, also environmental DNA. We did some sampling. We really wanted to get a picture on not just the kelp, not just the corals or the fish, but really what's going on with the entire biodiversity in the community. And at the same time, led by Megumi, we did a lot of workshops and interviews with local stakeholders. And I'm just going to show you, so until now, Nur and Remy have shown you some modeling results. So I'm going to show you some photos instead. They say a picture's 1,000 words. They obviously have a lot more stats, but I thought this would be cool to just show you some images. So what we've got here are images from the 2015-16 surveys and then from 2023. So on the left, you have Yakushima. And so in 2015-16, you have a really classic macroalgae coral mixed community. But when we went back in 2023, most of the macroalgae were gone. It was basically dominated by corals. And so this is kind of what you would predict under climate change and global warming, the loss of macroalgae, the expansion of corals. A little bit further north on mainland Japan in Kochi, in 2015-16, you had actually areas dominated by these large tabular corals, Acropora. But when we went back in 2023, the corals had died and there was instead a bunch of turf algae. And so what this happened here is actually a little bit counterintuitive. The warm current, the Kuroshio, which I'd shown you in the previous slide, that brings this warm water to mainland Japan, had meandered. And during winter, all the corals had died. So this was a very different scenario than we would have predicted originally. And on the next slide, I'm going to show you, this is just south of Tokyo in Chiba. 2015-16 ecosystem dominated by macroalgae, lots of temperate fish. In 2023, shocking, completely different ecosystem. Most of the macroalgae was gone. There were some table corals. The fish community had completely shifted. And so this, again, was an even more dramatic change than, say, in Yakushima, and more what you might expect under climate change. So to us, this was really informative because it looks like each of these areas is really doing its own thing, and it's not just a steady increase. You're getting more variation and more noise in the system. So on the next slide, finally, for the results, I'm just going to show you a little bit of our genetic results. So what this is here is we collected coral samples all across southern Japan of this one genus of corals, and we looked at its diversity. And as you can see, with the left being the tropical, subtropical areas, and the right, the graph being the temperate areas, the corals might be increasing, but it looks like what's increasing are things that were already locally there. You have very low diversity in mainland Japan versus southern Japan. And so this has really important conservation implications. This means that the corals in mainland Japan are not arriving from the south, but in fact, they're ones that have already been there that are increasing locally. In other words, the north in Japan is not a refugia for the corals in the south, and we need to protect each of these coral communities in their respective locations. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Megumi in Japanese. So the next two slides, Megumi, your turn.
はい、ジェイミー先生、ありがとうございます。こんにちは、浦島ラボの中野です。日本の各地で私たちが開催したインタビューやワークショップの結果と、これからの活動について話したいと思います。インタビューやワークショップの結果から、各地の MPA にはいくつかの共通の課題が見られることが分かりました。上の写真に見られるような生態系の劣化、漁業者や地域コミュニティなど伝統的な MPA の担い手の減少、日本社会は今急激な少子高齢化に悩んでいます。それに伴うデータの不足。日本の沿岸の集落はコミュニティが非常に伝統的で閉鎖的です。科学者が参加しづらいという課題もあります。それに対する、共通の課題として私たちは共通の対策として私たちは各地の生態系、地域社会の将来変化を科学者だけでなく地域住民の方と共に予測すること。各地で地域住民参加のモニタリング活動や分野横断的学際的な話し合いの場を作ることなどを試験的に行ってきました。その結果をもとに私たちが考えるこれからの活動について次のスライドで話したいと思います。
Sorry, next slide. Thanks.
日本の海域では統括する国の機関がありません。一つの海域に複数の法律や管理者が設定されています。そのため各地で主要なステークホルダーが異なります。また MPA シフトの結果からトロピカライゼーションのシナリオも各地で異なることが分かりました。したがって日本の海洋における気候変動適応策ではボトムアップ型アプローチが有効と考えられます。上の図は、奄美大島で地域住民と話し合って作成した現在の海と2050年に実現したい海のビジョンを示した図です。地域に残る伝統地と地域地を活用することで、地域コミュニティの参加が促進されて、このビジョンが自治体の公的な方針になりました。12月20日には合同ワークショップ、海の大人会議、子ども会議を鹿児島で開催します。イベントのリーダーは、伝統的な MPA 管理者である地域の漁業協同組合です。これからの MPA 管理者には、分野横断的、学際的に関係者をまとめて、生態系を守りながら、自然と社会、両方の課題解決に挑戦することが期待されます。この漁業協同組合は、イベントを契機に、山、川、海の管理者と地元のステークホルダーが参加する新しいプロジェクトを始める予定です。またこのワークショップにはたくさんの女性、ユース、子ども世代が参加を予定しています。女性、ユース、子ども世代が活動のリーダーとなる新しい海洋生態系管理のメンバーシップのあり方も示すことができると考えています。以上です。レンフェストオーシャンプログラムと関係者の皆様に感謝いたします。Next, I will pass to イクバルさん。Thank you.
Thank you, Megumi, and thanks to everyone who is still here with us. Hi, I'm Nindo from Fauna and Flora, and I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to share a bit about our project in Aceh, Indonesia. As Emily said before, I'm supposed to present this with my colleague Dedi, but unfortunately he couldn't join us today because the electricity and internet in Aceh still haven't fully recovered after the major flash flood that happened in Sumatra 2 weeks ago. I hope he and everyone affected are doing all right, and I truly hope that everyone impacted by the disaster can recover soon. On the next slide, I'd also like to thank everyone involved in this project. So this work is carried out by the team at Fauna and Flora in collaboration with the Ministry of Forestry, who manage the marine protected area where we work, along with the local government, universities, and customary institution of Panglima Laut, who actively supporting our activities in the field. As for the goal of this project, we are working with our partner to understand how climate change is affecting marine resources in two of Aceh outer islands, which is Kepulauan Banyak and Simelu. These communities rely heavily on small-scale fisheries, so even small environmental change can have real consequences for their livelihoods. In the past, the zoning process mainly focused on coral-related conditions and community involvement was very limited. This meant the zoning didn't fully reflect the realities on the ground or the broader risks faced by the people who depend on these waters. That is why we are working to improve the zoning approach by integrating climate vulnerability together with local knowledge, which I'll explain further in the next slides. So to enrich the information used in the zoning review, we relied on four main data sources. First, we use citizen science. Through this approach, we collected sightings of ETP species such as turtles, dolphins, and whales, as well as reports of violation and local fishing grounds from community members. We also incorporated data from local universities who is working in these sites. Secondly, we use updated remote sensing products to map key coastal habitats, including coral reef, seagrass beds, and mangroves. And third, we ran coastal vulnerability modeling. Instead of focusing on geomorphology, the model looks at how physical factors interact with coastal ecosystem and how these areas are currently used by surrounding communities. And finally, we conducted field survey for coral reefs. This survey didn't only measure coral cover or fish abundance, they also combined more than 30 variables, including benthic cover, physical condition, fish functional groups, management indicators, and human pressures to generate a relative resilience index for each site. All these datasets were then transformed into spatial layers and categorized into conservation value and cost value. We use Markson to analyze these layers and identify areas that offer the highest conservation benefit while avoiding areas with high cost. We do run the model 100 times, and areas selected more than 50 times were considered as strong candidates for fully protected or no-take zones. These areas shown in the green on the maps, and meanwhile, the red areas represent places with low or no conservation value and higher costs, such as recorded violations, active fishing grounds, or unstable substrates. Next, we broke this recommendation back to the communities and the relevant stakeholders to discuss where the no-take zone should be placed. All discussions were carried out openly, and we made sure to listen to every concern and suggestion that came from the different groups involved. After several consultation sessions, everyone agreed on the proposed no-take zone, which we can see here outlined in red. Only about 27.8% of the Markson recommendation were eventually included in the final no-take zone. But even though the number may seem small, these areas were fully agreed upon by all stakeholders, which help reduce potential conflict in the future. Another important point is that 56% of the recommended areas fall within the existing locally managed marine areas. This gives us more confidence that the activities within these areas will remain sustainable, especially since the LMMA system has been in place and functioning well since 2017. Alongside the biophysical assessment, we also gather socioeconomic information to understand how communities are experiencing climate risks and how they are adapting. We collecting this data through interviews, group discussions, and public consultations involving more than 1,300 participants across the two locations. From this assessment, we look at how exposed communities are to climate hazards, how sensitive their livelihoods are, and how strong their adaptive capacity is. When we put these indicators together, both Kepulauan Banyak and Simelu showed similarly high vulnerability scores. This means that people in both places are facing significant climate risk, but their capacity to cope or recover is still quite limited. We also assessed their livelihood assets and found an uneven pattern. Natural and human capital are relatively strong, but financial and physical capital are much weaker. This imbalance makes household more vulnerable, more vulnerable, especially when facing shocks like extreme weather or change in fisheries. Overall, these findings highlight that strengthening resilience in this MPA cannot rely on ecological measures. It also requires targeted socioeconomic support, better access to resources, and stronger local governance to help communities adapt more effectively. So based on the social and economic findings from the previous slide, we then identified several priority actions that can be included in the MPA management plan to strengthen resilience at the community level. First, we can strengthen community resilience through coastal rehabilitation, early warning system, and simple climate preparedness trainings. This action help communities respond more effectively to climate-related events. Second, we support sustainable livelihood by encouraging aquaculture, community-based ecotourism, and value-added processing of seafood products so fishing households can have more stable income sources. Third, we work to enhance local institution and governance, including Panglima Laut, cooperative village council, and community groups, because strong local institutions are essential for effective management. Fourth, improving adaptive capacity is also key. This includes climate literacy program, community education, and training on adaptive technologies and weather forecasting tools. We also aim to strengthen law enforcement and sustainable fisheries management to reduce destructive practices and improve compliance. And another important action is expanding access to finance, whether through cooperatives, microloans, or diversified income opportunities that can help fishing households become more resilient. And lastly, we emphasize integrating traditional knowledge and cultural values into both climate adaptation and resource management because these local systems have shaped sustainable practices for generations. Another key part of this project was strengthening local capacity and keeping stakeholders actively involved. Throughout the project, we developed 6 climate impact assessment guidelines. These documents pull together all the approach we use, like the vulnerability assessment, reef monitoring, and climate resilience planning, so the MPA staff and partner can continue applying the same methods long after the project ends. We also work closely with teams on the ground, where a total of 22 MPA staff join trainings on climate resilience management and vulnerability analysis, as well as the Marsan modeling. We also have 179 fishermen participated in coral bleaching monitoring program, combining simple classroom session with practice directly in the water across 10 villages. To support this effort, we also develop practical monitoring forms that make data collection easier while still keeping it reliable. Throughout the project, communities carry out 90 bleaching observation on their own, and the results consistently show only minor bleaching with levels below 5%. This gives us a clearer picture of local condition and how they change over time. Overall, these activities help build strong local skills, improve coordination across groups, and ensure that the tools and knowledge developed through this project can continue to be used in the future. Another part of the project focused on outreach and communication. So we work with local universities and the MPA authorities to co-design facilitation strategies that fit the local context, and we also develop creative outreach materials for school and communities. All these materials are currently in Indonesian language, and we're still working for the English version. Please do let us know if you're interested on it, and we'll let you know when it's ready. We also delivered climate literacy session in 10 villages and 5 secondary schools, reaching a total of 675 participants, including students, visitors, and community members. To make the learning more accessible, we adapted several popular local board games and added climate-related information to them so participants could absorb the concept in a way that felt familiar and enjoyable. We also ran the pre and post test to see how much people were learning. Many of the schools show clear improvement in climate change understanding, which give us confidence that this interactive approach really helped the material resonate. To close, I'd like to highlight a few key lessons from this project. First, the work helped fill major scientific data gaps, especially in areas where information was very limited. It is also strengthened local capacity by involving MPA authorities, communities, and universities throughout the process. Secondly, the project generated important strategic impact. It provided a much clearer foundation for long-term climate resilience MPA management and build stronger support for evidence-based decision making. Going forward, the next step is to translate the assessment and outreach guidelines into practical SOPs that can be used in daily management. Continued follow-up will also be essential, particularly through deeper engagement with local institutions so that the progress we've made can continue to grow and be sustained over time. I think that's all from me. Thank you all for your time and attention. With that, I'll pass it back to Emily.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank all of the speakers here. The insights from this portfolio truly have been really amazing. And we've gotten a lot of chats too from folks just to the hosts and panelists about this work. And so I want to honestly congratulate all of the researchers here for doing not just the research that's needed, but the engagement within communities that's needed to make it useful and to inform it and for it to really inform those communities as well. Because that's one thing that's always jumped out at me about this portfolio is the knowledge exchange has been really incredible. And so I want to thank you all for being willing to share the insights from your projects here. And so I think what we want to do is please folks put your questions in the Q&A. We will try to monitor the chat, but the Q&A is really for questions to the panelists here. To each of our panelists, what do you think the broader region and the field could learn from this portfolio of work supported by the Lenfest Ocean Program? And I'll let anyone who wants to go first take that on.
Is it okay to go first? Go for the
Go
low-hanging fruit?
for it, James. Yes.
All right, cool. Megumi and I and Maria have talked a lot about this actually, and I think for us, there's two things. The first is local knowledge is hugely important, and without it, you miss a lot of things. You know, you can model remotely, you can look remotely, but getting out into the communities and we saw, very different scenarios even in areas just a few kilometers apart. And so without going to these sites and talking with people, you'd miss a lot of those details, but those details actually really inform the science that comes after in the conservation. So, I think the for looking at all of the work here, everyone's out in the field talking and sharing with the local community, and that is absolutely critical. If you don't do that, you're going to miss a lot of stuff. That's actually that's both of them at the same time, I think. I think I went for the very low-hanging obvious answer, but to me, that's been a really educational part of this journey and listening to the other presentations as well. It's been, yeah, get out there and check all the communities and work with them.
Nice. Thank you. Remy, do you want to, I saw you come off mute. You're next.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I think I'll build up on what has been said by James. And there's another aspect to this in when you bring these community members, different communities into the same room, and they have different experiences and perceptions on these approaches. When those who have benefited from some of these interventions speak of the benefits, sort of shifts some of these perceptions of those people who are negatively perceptive of, for example, having a no-take closure. And the more they engage, and you also have approaches such as experiential learning processes, it's a powerful way of getting people to have a shift in mindset, but also they adopt or they pick up on some of these benefits much faster when they hear it from peers. So peer-to-peer learning, I think, is one of the important things that I've picked up in terms of the communities. Another thing is also aligning early with various government interventions at different scales. It's important to keep on having conversations with government agencies. For example, in Kenya, we have counties, listen to what their plans are, and you can be able to channel in and plug in some of these processes that you're working on. And in the end, they'll even call you because they know what you're doing. They'll call you and you can integrate into some of these processes at different scales. So having a close engagement with communities, having them share between peer-to-peer learning, but also having a very close ear on the ground with government interventions at different scales and seeing how you can be able to integrate your work. I think those are things that are very important when you want to sort of scale and get that movement on implementing some of these interventions.
I want to give space if Nur wants to add anything to this.
Yes, thank you, Emily, and everyone. I don't know why I can't turn on my video, but I'll
It's
just
all
talk.
good.
So imagine it.
We
Anyway,
can
yeah,
hear
I mean,
you.
you can hear me. Yeah, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but basically, I think for us, for our group, there's like three things. Like, first is the results from protected areas actually working as a climate adaptation tool, at least for kelp forests and in these regions. And we've seen it in the MPAs in California, and we saw it also in the locally managed areas in Mexico. So that is very encouraging. The second is that climate refugia is actually more common than what we thought, probably. And
Hmm.
found it in many places, in some places unexpectedly, which means that it's not just climate, it's also management, and it's also a bunch of things that make these places resilient. And we can go on if it's a refuge or not, but just these places are resilient. So this really encourages more work everywhere on understanding these places. And not only that, but what's the potential if we protect and manage these places? If we already see benefits from MPS from climate change, what can we achieve if we actually protect or manage some of these places? And that's a whole field for us to study, which is very exciting. And then the last one is basically what everyone has already mentioned about participatory science. I mean, this is basically the success of this project, and we are so happy that the Lenfest Ocean program existed and that we have now the Blue Convergence funds because we need funding for this type of projects, because it's really where we can achieve something when all actors are talking and communicating. And we found that a lot of the things that we thought we knew, the local communities also knew them, and we were all already talking the same language, much more than what we thought. And we've learned so much from each other. And I think that is a key point, especially when we can complain that governments and other agencies sometimes are not available. Well, we can build these communities, these participatory approaches, and these engagements, and through that process, we will probably fill some of those gaps. So my recommendation is for everyone working in conservation and management. If you don't have it, because Baja California is a very particular case where we have this 20 years of participatory science led by Stanford and Kobe and Wabese and many people that preceded me. If you don't have that, then build it. Even if it takes 10 years, 5 years, whatever it takes, build it because it will make the difference.
Yeah, I would just say that's a really great point. And I will contrast that with another project that we funded in this portfolio that was part of the last webinar where the partnership was completely new and providing support for them to build a charter for how they would work together with communities because they were establishing a new collaboration because that investment and commitment to the collaboration is so important to ultimately having the outcome. Like you can do all the right science and it still doesn't inform anything if you don't do it the right way. And so I think that's one thing we have absolutely learned from this portfolio. And now I'll shut up. I know we have some questions in the Q&A, Rebecca. So if we
Yeah,
want to
we
get
do. I just wanted to make sure
Oh,
Nindo,
Megumi.
if Megumi or Nindo
Yeah,
also
go
had
ahead.
some things to add.
I'd like to have a question for you, the other panelists. ジェイミー先生、翻訳お願いしてもいいですか？
I think actually it's still going on Wordly, right?
Yeah.
The Wordly's still going. So
OK
don't worry, Megumi, you can speak Japanese too.
Yeah, speak Japanese.
OK あ私が日本でワークショップやインタビューをやった時に一番悩みがあったのは どこの時点に、生態系回復の目標を置くかというところでした。気候変動の影響があったときに、例えばサンゴ礁の生態系が優先して、これまであった、海藻のを中心とした生態系が失われたときに、それを海藻の生態系に戻すことが正しいのか、それともサンゴ礁の生態系を保全していくことが正しいのかというのを、地域の方たちと議論を重ねながら見出していくというプロセスが必要だったんですが、そもそもどちらにフォーカスを置いて、決断をしていくことが生態系保全の観点から正しいのかということに、私はとても悩みを感じていました。で、日本の場合は特に統合的な国の機関や自治体の機関というのが海洋の中にありませんので、各地域に決断が任せられているというところもあります。なので、誰かがこうした方がいいという言葉を発することができないので、そこをローカルの人たちがどう決断していくのがいいのかというところに、もし何か他の地域からヒントがあれば教えていただければと思っています。
I'm reading through.
Yeah, the
どう
Wordly
でしょう。
looks good. I just read it over. It looks okay.
Oh, good. I'm reading through it. I mean, this is a great question. Takes priority. Yeah. I mean, the thing that my mind goes to is like that challenge with climate impacts where, yeah, one ecosystem takes priority and you need to sort of balance both or be responsive to both. And there's not time to be responsive. Like that's a big thing in the US, and a bit more of my background is US based, which is do our management processes have the capacity to respond to multiple things at the same time? And so I would, yeah, if any other panelists want to jump in on that, because I'm sure that's true everywhere.
お願いします。
Maybe I can take a stab at it. So one of the things that we looked at in the work in Kenya was connectivity. And I think you'll find that some places that have that are priorities for multiple critical habitats are very well connected. So that's one approach you could be able to look at in terms of including connectivity in your prioritization process. Yeah, I think it's a very real kind of challenge, and it's something that we really need to think about in terms of making decisions and prioritizing. But that's one way we can try and address that.
Yeah, does anyone else have anything to add when it comes to multiple important ecosystems and one may be taking, like, because I get it about like coral reefs are also charismatic, right? They do tend to take up a lot of attention. So, you know, I don't know if anyone else has anything to add about like trying to balance ecosystems that are critical to resources in different ways, but one might be more charismatic than the other. Because seagrasses are critically important. Like, I mean, well, Remy, you're a project, like like seagrasses, like oyster beds, coral reef, it was like all three. I'm not putting you on the spot, Iqbal, but I have to say Indonesia has some wild coral reefs. So I have anything to say. You are free, but you
Yeah.
don't have to.
Uh, for us, I would say that it is more likely we decided based on the ecosystem services offered by the habitat, because in Indonesia, most of the local communities and other peoples is relying heavily on the coral reef resources. That's why our focus is on the coral reef, but maybe in a region, the focus can be scattered or divided into the other habitats like the seagrass and mangrove and also others habitat, which is everything is important, but all of the habitat has their own ecosystem services, which is very locally based and different in any regions. I could say something.
Mm. Mm. Why don't we jump into, Rebecca, some of the questions in the Q&A?
Yes, I was just going to say. So one of the first questions that popped up came from Tin, and they said, terrific applied conservation action examples that Nindo had shared during the presentation on Indonesia. And the question is, have there been any examples that look at how climate change impacts habitats and behavior of marine megafauna, for example, whales and turtles? And I open the floor to folks if they want to chime in. I think, James, you had mentioned you might be able to give some examples from Japan.
Yeah, I'm sure there's published information out there on migration patterns and feeding patterns of all sorts of different animals. One thing I think that probably Megumi and I noticed is in southern northern Japan, just south of Tokyo, is the northern limit for green sea turtles nesting areas, and the locals were reporting a lot more nestings than before. Um, and whereas it used to be one or two, now there's 50 to 100 turtles coming up on these beaches. And so some of these turtles are often, still considered endangered in parts of Japan. So it sort of represents, potential tourist opportunities as well, and education and outreach opportunities. I don't think anything's been published on this, but you can see, at least in Japan, a lot of the megafauna are shifting their ranges, and they move much easier than, say, benthic corals. So yeah, I'm sure there's a lot more examples out there. We weren't focusing on megafauna so much, but yeah, at least in our part of the world, everything's changing and changing rapidly, and you can see it.
Thanks for that,
And
James.
sorry,
No,
and
go
adding
ahead.
to that, yeah, so we do choose the megafauna data as one of the parameters for the zoning plan, but we haven't assessed the impact yet because we are still in the preliminary stage, and we do really wanted to see how that megafauna is affected by the climate change as well. We'll let you know if we have the answer for that.
Great. We have another question from Kiefer. They asked, for the several panelists who worked with community stakeholders, what were some of the effective ways you identified community stakeholders and residents who were willing to participate? When proposing MPAs, how did you manage conflict? Were the conflicts generally between community member opinions, or were communities generally united in favor or opposition to certain MPA maps?
I can answer part of it.
Great.
In our case, one of our challenges was that we kind of built for this project a bigger team than we usually were working before. So we expanded to all of Baja California, and some of the fishing communities we interacted were relatively new working in this type of workshops, participatory science, and with the broader team. And to approach that, that's why we had scientists from UABC, NGOs, and other partners that actually they were the ones contacting and reaching out to the people. And that's the way we kind of assembled the original new team with the local partners. So basically, it takes time and you need to invest people that already know those people and search and ask. That's what we did. In terms of conflicts, we didn't propose any management, like any specific management outcomes, MPAs or new zoning or new things. So we didn't have that conflict, but we did have some people that maybe were less used to this type of processes, that it was a bit difficult to they kind of took away what's it called, the attention of the objectives and what we were doing and things. So we had to spend a lot of time addressing that. And the way we did it was after the first workshop, we decided to spend a whole day just connecting and doing icebreakers and different activities that actually connected people and build relationships, and that helped move together a bit more smoother. So I would say, in general, investing a lot of time on searching and connecting to people. And then while you're working, if you need extra time in a workshop and you're not meeting the objectives, forget about the objectives, build those relationships first. I think that's what we learned.
あ、私ももしよければアイデアをご提供できるかもしれません。私が、各地の活動地の一つである奄美大島で活動した時には、最初、私たちみたいな NGO 団体も非常に警戒されました。コミュニティが閉鎖的で伝統的なので、外から来た人間は科学者であったとしても受け入れがたいというのがコミュニティの最初の反応でした。私たちがいろいろな方が、いろんな人たちをつなぐ役割を果たすために、最初にやったことが、コミュニティが持っている伝統のストーリー、自然と人間の生活との間にある伝統のストーリーを掘り起こしていくことです。そのために地域の長老の方々、年齢が高くて自然と一緒に共生してきた伝統的な知恵を持っている方々の話を掘り起こして、それと科学的なデータをつなぐことでコミュニティの間にミーティングを作るという活動を最初に行いました。で、これが元になって、コミュニティの間に支持が広がって、そこに自治体が参加するという形を作ることができました。また、日本は非常にコミュニティがやはり閉鎖的なので、いきなりいろいろな方々を一つの場面に集めるというのがとても難しいというのがあります。ただし、日本人の性質なのか、イベント、お祭りを作るというのはとても大好きで、この時期から3月までの間というのは、日本各地でさまざまなイベントが開かれています。それはNGO ですとか、自治体ですとか、いろいろな方々が集まるイベントなんですが、このような形で人々が楽しんで集まれる。でも中身に議論する場所があるというようなイベントそのものの集まり方の、作り方も少し地域の事情に合わせた作り方をすることで少しずつですが、で、それを繰り返すことで少しずつですが、科学的なデータの知識というのも聞いてもらえるようになりました。もし他の地域でも、日本独自なのかもしれませんが、他の地域でも役に立つようでしたら嬉しいなと思います。
I think it's true in other regions too. Like, I love that because like I think honestly the COVID lockdowns taught us you can't do everything virtually. There's a moment where we're like, oh, we can do this. But like the chance to be together, like you say, have fun together. Um, I absolutely love that. And I think that's the kind of work that needs to be done to build trust. There's a lot of like very highly localized communities that are closed off. And because they've been doing what they're doing for a long time and nobody was interested or no, or there was top-down management for a number of reasons, historical reasons. So I think one thing that this portfolio to me has proven across cultures, despite many unique aspects of each culture, is this importance of being in community and working at the pace of trust. So I thought you put that perfectly, Megumi.
I think that also touches on a question that was asked a little earlier, and Nur, you answered it with a text response, but someone had asked about some of the challenges that folks had while working with local communities and how you might share that real-time information with schools. And I think Nur, you had responded with, saying one of the challenges was actually initiating the effort, right? Um, and so I didn't know if others had other challenges that you wanted to highlight, and how you might have overcome them throughout the process. Remy.
Yeah. So something interesting that I did mention was the area where we have the trade-offs of benefits and costs is an area that was um, it was identified for the establishment of a reserve by governments, and the communities there did not accept that. And there was a back and forth historically. So anybody who comes there, an NGO or government tells them that we have an intervention, they've been very like averse. But prior to this project that was funded by Lenfest, we've had another project that was being under WCS where it was a 2-year project. And it was basically a project where they're building trust and working together to sort of think about these issues and contextualize the challenges they're facing in a manner that will enable them to see the solutions that are applied. So it's only through, because of the benefits of that it's a process to build trust. So building that trust, and also when you're talking about these benefits in a scientific man, you break it down in a language that I think that's what everybody applies, but try and put it in a very simple way that they can understand. So we're able to leverage off that process of basically like 2 years. And by the time we were coming in, they wanted a closure because they'd been working and they were able to see, yes, they were able to monitor their catch, they were able to see where their money is going from another project. So I think it takes time. And also identifying there are leaders in communities who are more charismatic than others, and they really have like a vision and they're committed to the cause. So within these communities, also trying to identify those people who you'd be able to work with and share the same kind of vision is pretty useful. But what I can say is it takes time to build trust. You need to find the right kind of, it's different in different places. Like I've had elders, I've had traditional, like there are these hierarchies that you need to consider once you're moving in. So I think those are some of the ways we were able to address that in our context in Kenya.
Is it okay? One quick on top of Remy's. I think one of the things we did when we set up this program or in our research was uh, we were also kind of realistic. We chose sites that we knew um, were probably more open to collaboration and discussion and also inviting researchers in. Like Remy said, choosing local leaders that are charismatic and respected is also important, but also sometimes the leaders change and things can really go back and forth. And so we actually had one site that we did in 2015 that now they don't let anyone even enter the water in their area, not even scientists, not even the local scientists that have a marine station there. And so you choose areas that either look to be open to this to serve as examples, and then the neighboring communities will look and go, well, that's interesting. Maybe, breaking the ice initially is often tough, but once there's a bit of success, then a lot of other people wish to join. And so you sort of try to look for those areas where maybe there's a need, but also a willingness to do it. And even then, humans, right? We're fantastic and awful at the same time. So you win some, you lose some. And I think Megumi can really attest to that. Like some of the areas where are great successes and others, maybe next time. It's you can't do it all at once. You've got to go brick by brick, community by community.
So, sorry, just to add another thing, before we went to the site where we did the final trade-offs, we had planned to go to another one that was much further north. And the government, because we were in touch with government, they told us, don't go there. There's a conflict. And currently, they're very sensitive to any kind of intervention. So also working with government and knowing what's going on was also one way of getting to know how things are running. on the ground.
If I can add a
Please.
last thought as well. Yeah, I mean, also for us, and maybe this is very Spanish in Latin America, but American, and I'm sure in other places, also flow a little bit. I think for us, it was very helpful to build the project as we were doing the project. So, for example, the people that came to the first workshop, the second or the third, it evolved. And we incorporated more and more people as we went through the project. And some of those people were actually key leaders, not specifically from the communities. Some were scientists that had the trust of the communities and were working with the communities that we were missing them in the first workshop. And that was part of the results that came from the first workshop. Include more people. There are all of these other efforts that you're not considering and bring them on. So by doing that, as we did the project and we learned from it, we brought the right players and projects. And I think that also at the last workshop, we could see that it really catalyzed workshops, informal meetings, and other things that we did. So I think also don't be too rigid and objective focused and let it also naturally evolve.
Yeah, I gotta say, I really love that. And even in our funding processes at Blue Convergence Fund and formerly the Lenfest Ocean Program, it was a constant like, what's the progress we can make now? And then what's the gaps that we can fill when we learn from what we've done? And being open to that and adding as you go along is really, I think, really important. Really important. I don't know, Iqbal, if you have anything to add to that. I feel like you all in Indonesia did so much to reach out to new communities too.
Yeah, so in Indonesia, we are lucky enough because this is not the very first time we are working with the local community. We've been working with them partially since 2011. That's why the acceptance of the local community is quite good during the project. And I also wanted to highlight that it is not only about what we need from them, but we are also trying to accommodate what they need from us in a way that to build trust between us and the local communities as well.
That's great. I don't know if we have any more questions, Rebecca. Do we want to?
No, I was just gonna ask one last time if folks want to pop in a question for the panelists. Otherwise, we will adjourn. Just give it a second.
Can I also add about the
Please.
the first question that you asked about the for the all of the grantees? So following to the question for us in Aceh, one of the strongest lessons from this portfolio is about relationship because working side by side with the MPA staff, the Panglima Laut, local government, and surroundings community groups help us build a shared language about around the climate risk, livelihood, and small-scale fisheries, and that trust and social capital is now as important as the technical tools because it is what will keep the work moving after the project ends and it creates space for harder conservation about trade-off and compliance. Um, we also realize how important it is to plan for change in people and institutions. Staff will rotate, leaders will change, and new partners will come in. So that is why we try to turn our methods into simple guide, training models, and tools that local teams can continue to use without us. And looking ahead, we hope that this mix of strong local partnerships and practical documented methods can support deeper work in more villages in Aceh and give other regions a concrete example of how to keep climate-informed MPA management alive even when the people in the room change over time. Yeah, that's all from me.
I love that. Thanks, Mindo. Just to close, a quick question for folks, if you want to go around. What's next for your work in a sentence or two? What's next?
Can I jump in?
Yes.
So after this project, we are currently working in developing the sustainable financing mechanisms for the local community. We are currently identifying several sources that can be potential to be developed in a more advanced way to generate more income to the local community as well, and also benefiting the ecosystem as well.
Thanks, Indo. James?
From our side, I think it's kind of a two-pronged thing. One is I think Megumi's work has really shown there's a huge need for a more sort of social science scholarship in Japan, and because things are changing right now. So we have a few students starting to work on that, and Megumi's also start making Urushima bigger and bigger. So that's cool. And then on the science end, we're trying to do these surveys once every 5 years. The power of scientific observation, I think, is kind of exponential. One observation is n equals one, two is four, three is nine, etc. And so I think over time, having this time series to really, a lot of people know climate's changing, but there's not a lot of data in Japan. And so actually showing numbers, that are inarguable, unless, you really don't believe in numbers, is something I think that's also important for government agencies and local communities to see. So we're going to keep, one way or another, we're going to keep doing this work.
Nice.
Nur.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple, but one of them, there's now, I didn't say it, but it's a good moment, a national restoration plan for kelp in Mexico. That part was supported by this project and others, like the information. So supporting that project is our next priority, and embedding refugia and the knowledge into that program as it unfolds. The other one is also continuing to generate these data sets that have been, as James was saying, it's the priority because it gives us all the basic data set that then we can use to understand. And then finally expanding it, or at least supporting more than expanding other regions that we're working with, like we were saying, through the accelerator project, and learning from other regions how this information is useful and how we can support other efforts. So I think that's probably where the next steps of the project.
Great. Thanks, Nur. And Remy?
Yeah, thanks. So there's a number of models, three models for different habitats that have been developed. These are more of like global models, but I mentioned one of the gaps was sort of contextualizing this to local conditions. And there is a bit of a gap also in the data. So trying to get to refine global scale models to more localized scale conditions, and also like channeling in all that work, products, outputs, the processes, integrative processes to governance interventions at different scales. The area which I outlined with the trades and benefits and risks is an area of a joint co-managed area between two communities. So that's a small scale. So having them implement or include some of these outputs in their management plans and how they plan their area is something that is underway. But also there's a national marine spatial planning process in Kenya where they're currently engaging multiple stakeholders to sort of get as much information as possible to inform the National Marine Spatial Plan. So that's the long and the short for
Yeah, I
people.
love it. A lot of exciting work to come. Thank you all again for joining us, and feel free to reach out to the panelists. We place their contact information in the chat, and feel free to reach out. Also, feel free to reach out to Emily or myself, also in the chat. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much to all
Can
of
I say
you
a last thing?
for doing this.
Thank
Go ahead.
you.
Yes, just massive thanks to Rebecca, Charlotte, and Sarah for all your support. No, we're we're very sad that the Lenfest project closed, but very happy that you're now in the Blue Convergence. I just wanted to thank you so much for all the support. It's been an amazing experience.
No, thank you for doing the work. That makes it easy to fund. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone. This has
you.
been great.
Thank you,
It's just the
everyone.
start.
Thank you very
Yep.
much.
Thank you.
Bye bye.